Hi, welcome to Just Between Us. This is Dana and Briar. So today we have one of my favorite topics, which is therapy and astrology. And Briar is a therapist and an astrologer. So I wanted to pick her brain a bit today on the power of using therapy and astrology together. As a therapeutic process. Because I found personally, for me, therapy is great and has been helpful to me. And in therapy, like, you and you as a therapist, you really are so strong when you sit with a person, like, I'll use myself as an example, like sitting with the pain, sitting with the feelings, and like kind of being a witness to that and asking the right questions, which is great. But I found when we use astrology as a blueprint, it was really helpful in understanding all of that on a deeper level. What it was trying to teach me, what am I, what are these experiences trying to teach me? It kind of just helps us go there much faster, much deeper, which for me as a person, like I like to rip the Band-Aid and just go and just deal with it and face it. So I found astrology really helpful to me. And also, I've always been interested in astrology. So it's actually helped me understand myself so much deeper and I guess the right time. So I was ready to go in there and ready to dig in there. But also it's helped me appreciate myself and take care of myself in a different way because I began to really understand myself. So that's why I always say, I'm like, wow, people need to do more of this, like add astrology and therapy together. Because you said something, and I'm a big believer of this, that, I always say, like, as souls, before we come in the body that we come into, we choose the experiences we want to learn. And from that, we choose the parents that we have, the experiences we need to experience so that we can do the work that we came here to do. So to be of service at the capacity we decided we wanted to do. And I remember in our first session in astrology therapy, you told me, you're like, yeah, so you as a soul, if you chose to come here to this world for a specific reason, to do specific things, the right time is not, the time that you were born is not a coincidence. It's there to support you on that journey. So the time you were born and where the planets were placed at that specific time is there to support you on that journey. And then once you go into your chart in more detail, it makes more sense because everything has a meaning. So enough about me in this process. I wanted to hear more from you. First, about when did you start learning about astrology? Was it before or after therapy, like learning to be a therapist?
Oh, wow, way before.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I started reading. I first read Linda Goodman's Sun Signs when I was maybe 12.
Oh my God, me too.
Yeah.
Maybe not 12, but older, yes.
Yeah. And got quite obsessed with it. And then went on and read all of the, not all, but a lot of the work by the depth psychology astrologers of the 60s and 70s and 80s. There was a lot of books that came out from people who are also clinical and non-clinical psychologists and who are writing, who are also astrologers. So like Liz Green and Stephen Arroyo and Harold Sass-Bordas and people like that. So I was always reading these books, and it just resonated. You know this, like when people come to it, it either resonates or it doesn't resonate. And I think we're not all meant to engage with it either consciously, but for me it was really, really young because it just made sense. Just made sense of things, but it's not, and hopefully we can explore this today, what people think it is most commonly. There's so much misunderstanding about what it actually is. So maybe we can clear some of that up today.
Yeah, definitely. I have a few later on I wanted to ask because there's a lot of misconceptions. But I think there's something very powerful about astrology, which is why it it existed in all these ancient traditions. And as astrology in general, and even medical astrology, like all of it, I think there's a reason why the teachings are there and are old. And I think maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, about like the history of astrology.
History, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first charts that we have now today go back to Sumeria or ancient Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So what's this, about 5,000 years? I don't know.
I should
Maybe
have paid attention to my
should have
dad
paid
when he used to
attention
talk.
there.
Yeah.
So old, very old.
Yeah.
And we have them, their cuneiform. And basically that was an astrology of the populace. So it was more focused on, they'd observe, they had watchers with an ERS, watchers who would watch the sky.
Yeah.
And then they would write down what they were observing, and then they would watch what happened in the populace. So learning about whether the harvests would succeed, or the king would be okay, or things like that. Things that affected everybody was more the astrology. Wars, what was the outcome of wars, that sort of thing. And they would make these correlations between celestial events and earthly events. And so that was the earliest astrology, right? And then it sort of progressed on, and the ancient Greeks picked it up, the Egyptians, and then the ancient Greeks, the Ptolemies, so from Egypt to Greece. And then you got sort of astrological schools starting to happen, and it was all tied together. Like, there wasn't such a thing as an astrologer. It was, someone was a mathematician, an astronomer, and an astrologer all rolled into one. So what later, after the scientific revolution, what split out was the interpretive part of it. Anything that wasn't sort of natural sciences got exited. But before then, it was all one and the same. So there was room for that poetry of the stars, right? And then during the Dark Ages, there was a flourishing in the Renaissance. And then during the Dark Ages, it really kind of disappeared in what's now called Europe. But it was the Islamic Empire that preserved it during that time. So from around, Baghdad was 742, they elected the chart for Baghdad. So they chose when to, like, astrologers chose that because they wanted Jupiter on the ascendant, and they wanted these things, and we've still got that chart. And then from then till about 1400s, the Islamic Empire translated a whole bunch of work from the Sanskrit, from the Greek, into Arabic. And they developed a lot of the timing techniques that we still use today. And then what happened around the 1400s was the libraries in what's now modern day Spain held a lot of these works. And when they were going to have the Reconquista, when the Spanish kings and queens were taking back over from the Islamic Empire, scholars from all over Europe kind of rushed there to translate into the Latin. So the Islamic Empire kind of held it and furthered it. And then from then it went along in use until we had Copernicus and the discovery of the planets would go around the sun, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And then the natural sciences became much more of a thing. And of course, you can't explain astrology through the lens of natural sciences. You can't do it. And the modern scientific method, you can't use that on astrology. Of course you can't. But what we have to remember is that's not all that exists. That's just the philosophical movement we exist inside of. So what happened then was it went into sort of disrepute and stopped being used in favor of like real sciences. And then around the about 1900s, with the Theosophical Society and the sort of the spiritualism movements in the West, it came back. And then around the 1930s, you started having the depth psychologists like Carl Jung diving into it and reclaiming it as a sort of an archetypal science. And then you got the depth psychologists, the ones I said I read before, of the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, applying it to psychological processes. And so that brings us all the way up to now. And in the last 20 years, there's been a resurgence of the Hellenistic, old Greek techniques as well, so traditional work as well. And that's basically the history of astrology in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Abridged version. But yeah, it's always been around and people have used it. But of course, people have never wanted to admit they use it, at least in the last couple of 100 years, because of the dominance of the scientific method.
Yeah.
So, like Carl Jung was an astrologer, but didn't really advertise the fact because he was also a psychiatrist. And so now what we're seeing is a little bit of a breaking down of that as people are being willing to kind of come out the closet. I mean, for ages, I didn't tell anybody I did it. I would just use it one-on-one with people when they're open. But now I'm like, okay, I can talk about this. And there'll be some people who think, that it lessens my credibility as a psychologist, but that's okay.
Yeah. And do you find, this, it's very interesting because, like, on one part, I'm thinking about how we always want to go back to science to kind of prove things, but sometimes it's much bigger than that.
Well, that's just one way of knowing.
Yeah.
So we've been trained in our education system that science says, then it's true. But that itself is an unscientific statement. The point of science is to prove how things are not true. So it's like, it is proven is very unscientific. But that bubble, the sort of the scientific lens with which we look at the world, if you can't measure it, weigh it, touch it, or understand it, it doesn't exist. Obviously, we know any of us that have done any kind of depth psychological work or have had experiences with psychedelics or have had any numinous or transcendent religious experiences know that there's way more to the world than what we can see. And so I think things like astrology, they speak to that.
Yeah.
But you've got to understand it with a different part of your mind, and really not just your mind. You've got to understand it with a more of a whole self. And not everyone's up for that.
Yeah. I agree with you. And, I get that a lot. Like when people ask me about, okay, but what is astrology? Like how prove it? And I'm just like, oh, I don't know. It's to me, it's a feeling that it's like for example, you have a dream and your dreams are your subconscious mind talking you to someone. People say, it's not, how can I prove that? I can't prove it. It's a feeling. It's a knowing. And I feel for me, astrology, and I don't know as much, like for me also learning about the history is also new to me. But it's something I can't prove, but it's something that I can feel.
Yeah. I mean, well, we've been taught
touches on that.
Yeah, because we've been taught we have to prove things, and yet we're having experiences all day, every day that you can't really understand in that way that are still meaningful and impactful. So the way I think of astrology is it's not about transmitting information to somebody, it's about activating someone. So when you use their chart, you're engaging in a ritual of activation. So like you would with plant medicines, like you would with different rituals, even if you want to be really kind of mundane about it, the way, say, personal trainers will engage in ritual around exercise, or eating coaches will engage with ritual, this is really powerful. But when you're getting into using someone's astrology chart in therapy, you have to make sure that they're really ready for that type of activation, just like you'd want to make sure someone's ready to take a particular plant medicine to help them discover more about themselves. Not everyone's ready for that. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what makes you, like, if you were to compare, okay, you do therapy all day, every day, and some of that therapy is astrology and therapy. What would you say is the difference when working with astrology and therapy with your clients?
Okay. So I don't kind of divide it up in my mind. When I work with somebody, I tune into that person. So what's happening in the room, hopefully, is whatever that person requires for where they're at. So astrology is something that I have that I can sort of bring forward if I feel, I'm very intuitive with it. So if I feel that that's the place that that person could experience some powerful help or activation. Sometimes, I mean, more and more now people ask for it.
Yeah.
Because I think people are learning more about it. There's lots of apps and all sorts of stuff that they're reading about it and learning about it more. But generally I just get a feel for it. So it's not it's not like two camps, therapy without astrology and therapy with astrology. I mean, if you're talking in archetypes, you're using astrological language, and I'll talk in archetypes all the time, even if I'm not. So say I'm sitting with someone and I understand they're born in May, right? So their sun is in the sign of Taurus, okay? They're the least likely to believe in astrology, by the way. Because for people who are with the sun sign Taurus, they're very much about the senses. They're sensualists. So they've got to touch it, taste it, smell it, feel it. If things are real, are valuable to them often. And this is just the sun sign, right? Because saying someone's a sun sign Taurus is like saying, you know, they're a man from India. That's one thing about them. That's very millions of ways you can be that, right? So when you say I'm dealing with that Taurian archetype in the room, I would be very careful. And this is me using astrology without using it overtly. I'd be very careful to go near astrological language unless I knew them really well, because they're most likely to call it bullshit, which I find deeply funny and ironic, seeing that they're Taurus the bull, and I don't usually point that out. But that sort of archetype lends itself.
It hit now.
To get it? The amount of times I've heard that. But then say I'm sitting with someone who's sun in Sagittarius, right? They're going to have potentially more of a philosophical bent. They're going to be more interested in developing theories of why, and they're going to be interested in discovering the big T truth on a sort of a mental and philosophical level. So they're going to be a lot more open usually. So I already know kind of based on looking at, I mean, I would never run somebody's chart without their express permission, but I know from the date of their sun sign, I know their sun sign. So I can use it that way. But if you're using archetypal language, you're using metaphor, you're talking about things like the hero's journey, or anything that's about processes or going through things, or shadow work or dark night of the soul, or any of that stuff, you're in the realm of the astrological language. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is there's no kind of neat category called astrology.
But like, and I mean, I'm, you also teach astrology classes, of which I'm a student. I understand that more now, that there's so many components. But what do you find when you do therapy with astrology? How do you find that it's helpful?
It's that activation. So when you're reading someone's chart, so if you bring in if a person's cool with it and you bring in their actual chart, there's three things you're really doing with them in that moment, right? So one is I'm looking at a symbolic language, and I've learnt to interpret that language. So I'm interpreting that language system for them. Okay, so that's sort of skill, or a science, so to speak, right? So it's like understanding what means what, and deciphering it to them, because it's all very mysterious with all its little glyphs and codes and lines and all of that stuff for anyone's ever seen a chart. So that's happening. The second thing that's happening is I've spent years reading and practicing, so I have a way of, I call it weaving stories out of that chart. So I'll go to different parts of their chart and I'll weave stories that hopefully will be part of their own personal myth. So I'm synthesizing the elements in that chart to make meaningful stories that make sense and that have some sense of relevance to that person, right? But then the third thing we're doing in that room is we're calling in something. We're doing an act of divination. So there's a sense of power that can come around it, and combining all those three things leads to that activation that I'm talking about. So that, you can imagine, can be really, really potent, but you can only really do that with the souls who are really up for it. They want all those three things. Some people just want a bit of the first one, oh, tell me about this thing. What is it? They just want to put a toe in the water. That's fine. I can go all the way when somebody's kind of ready, and I sort of feel when they are. But yeah, I mean, I've had it fed back to me that when that activation lands, it can be really profound and can really even change the course of what's going on for them. So that's the point. It's
Yeah.
not to be, as an astrologer, you don't do astrology to prove astrology or to show how accurate you can be or to make predictions. I mean, in this system, there are different systems that are more predictive. I'm not really interested in prediction, so much as themes and cycles and how someone might meet the kind of current weather, so to speak, which I'll do in therapy anyway, just without that language. It's more to do something which is to help somebody. It comes out of the same place that the therapy comes out of.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just therapy with a different brand on it to suit that person, you know, using a different tool, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes. And you know, like, so the first part is you would explain to the person, obviously, the chart, right? The blueprint, what that looks like, because yeah, it is, when you first look at a chart, you're like, what the fuck, you know, and then, and you don't want to lose them, because then, you know, sometimes what happens is people get overwhelmed. They're like, oh my God, what does this mean?
Yeah.
And I must say, you're very good at being like, okay, this is what it looks like. You kind of go into like beginner explanation
Break
of
it down.
yeah, break it down, what this means, what that means, but what that means for you.
Yeah.
You know, like for the person. So say it's me, you know, like you will go, you'll look at the chart, you will explain, okay, this is the different placements. And then what does that mean for you? How does that look like for you? How is that being experienced by you?
Yeah.
Which to me, you know, when you're thinking of, you know, so when you're in therapy, right? I'm telling you how I'm feeling, how I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, whatever my challenges, right? Then when you go add astrology in it and you're showing me my blueprint and you're explaining to me how I'm experiencing things and the challenges that I'm experiencing with things, oof, for me, that's because it's like you feel seen on a level that I cannot explain. Like it's like, oh my God, someone understands me, because that part was just struggling within me, and I'm coming to you and yapping, I'm feeling all these things, whatever. But now I'm not telling you anything. You're looking at this blueprint and you're telling me, oh wow, you have this happening. Oh wow, you must be experiencing this, or you must have had these type of experiences. You know, how did that feel? And it's like, you know, to feel seen and understood, I think is part of the therapeutic process. You know, it goes back down to, we always say about vulnerability, and it's about me sharing and I'm sharing and we're sharing, and then that becomes healing. But I'm not really talking, and you're showing something about what it's been for me and what is the learning that I'm supposed to be getting out of this. It is so activating and so therapeutic and healing that I'm like, oh my God, more people should be doing this. I'm that type of person. If I get excited and something really works for me, I want everybody to do it. And you're very right. Like it's not for everybody, and it's sometimes not the right time, and it's not, and it's about, I agree, it can be very overwhelming, because when I look now in my 20s, I used to do this thing on astrology where you put your birthday, whatever, and then they give you this like whole chart thing. And then I remember going to London as well. This astrology shop, you give them your birthday and they give you a booklet. And I remember, I won't lie, I was a bit irritated. I didn't like what the reading was.
Yeah.
It kind of, I'm like, I don't like that I'm this kind of person. It was very weird. It's like there was a bit of a rejection of that. I'm like, why did I choose this? I don't want this. I want to be somebody else, but it's when I sat with you and we went through it, it made so much more sense, and it became very personalized. And that's why I feel like these apps are great, and these stuff are great, but it's also very limiting at the same time, because it just shows you one aspect, not the whole aspect of you.
It's a very tricky thing, because astrology should help you, like any good therapeutic intervention should help set you free. It shouldn't put you in a box, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're doing in normal therapy is you're trying to work with the person to help them to dignify the parts of their experience which are painful, and to sort of move away from the position that they might be in, which is, I need to get rid of this stuff so that I can be fixed, right? So in therapy, I'm doing a lot of work with people to sort of look at the pain or the painful processes not as bad or wrong, but as somehow necessary, and somehow dignify them, and sure, ameliorate symptomology and things like this, but and not sort of drown in suffering. You can lighten this, but to not have it but just be, happy, good, sad, bad.
Yeah.
Right. Which is what we've been fed as a culture. In fear and sadness have been turned into diseases. And so how do you do that? So astrology just kind of helps you go that extra step more into that if someone's open, because you can look at something like, say, something in the chart that when you explore it, it touches on some pain because it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Or it's a real Achilles heel, right? You can see that as a choice, which would be the philosophy of astrology, that you somehow, on some level, that your everyday mind and ego can't grasp, that you somehow chose that. It dignifies it. It gives it meaning. And so I think we're looking at helping people construct meaning from experience, which is something we have moved away from. There was a recent study done in the UK, and I don't know the actual ins and outs of this study. It's just one study, but something like 80% of respondents came back and said that their life has no meaning. Can you believe that? Like, this is where we're at as a species, right? That we have done away with process orientation. We've done away with kind of quieter internal processes. Everything is to be shown. And the impatience with which people work. Like so I find I do chart readings for someone in their 20s and so if I get somebody who's 9 years old and I do a chart reading, which I have done, I'll do that very differently. Like, I'm a completely different astrologer for that. If I'm with someone in their 20s, I'm a different astrologer again. And if I'm with someone up around 40, I'm a completely different one again. And if I'm working in someone in their 60s, because different parts of their chart have now been lived. And that makes all the difference in the world. When you're in your 20s and you're getting that report, you hadn't lived half of that chart. So it meant nothing to you. Or your discursive ego mind could just judge it as not being as good as, and in your 20s, you're comparing yourself to everyone everywhere all the time. Yeah. So there's that. So you have to be working with it. It's not just something you deliver. It's something you engage with in real time with where that person's at in their phases and stages. Yeah. Makes sense?
Yeah, you're right. Because when I was looking at that in that time, I rejected a lot of parts of myself that I knew were there. I didn't want to claim those parts. And so that was bringing that, and I wasn't ready for that. And now when I look, sometimes I say, oh, I wish I had you earlier in my life, or I wish I did classes early in my life. But then I was thinking, I don't think I was ready for it, and like timing, I think it's about, this was the time for me. Even though I was always interested in astrology and I have all the books and stuff and I would learn it, but not in this depth until now. But I don't think I was ready then. And I think to go to this point, that astrology also brings up fear for some people.
Yeah. It can do.
Yeah. And I this is definitely something I've always been working on. Fear. I am quite fearful and I get anxious, and I now know why I'm doing it now, learning about it, because I don't think the fear was very loud in my 20s. And I don't think I would have been able to see that and really take it in. Now I can take it in. And yes, the fear shows up 100%, but I kind of I feel more confident in being able to work with it.
Yeah.
And I think that also sometimes stops people from looking at astrology because of that fear.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying. It's not in astrology, you don't predict, you're not predicting, right?
There is, with every one thing that you can see in the chart, there's so many different ways that could play out.
Yeah.
Depends on how the person is living their life.
Yeah.
It depends on all sorts of things, which I can't even nail down. So
Yeah.
to try to go there and introduce something to someone like, this means this, to me, it's not how I want to be as a therapeutic person. our natural instinct is to go to kind of happy, good, sad, bad,
Yeah.
black, white. That's how we're trained in our education system, right? So that gets applied to astrology. Like, what's a good aspect in my chart? What's a good place for
Yeah.
the sun to be? What's a bad place for
Yeah.
it to be? And then I'm cursed, you know? And then different cultures too have different levels of superstition around stuff. And so you have to navigate all of this, you know? We can play out an astrological chart any way we want, you know? And I always think it's a good way of putting into some really poetic, metaphorical language the pathway to a sort of a more evolved way of being.
Mm.
And that's very powerful for somebody when
Yeah.
they can look at, so they can look at, you know, Venus placement in Libra, like you've
Yeah.
got, right? And they can go, oh, you know, like, oh, does that mean I'm vain and like obsessed with like stuff and appearance and like want everyone to like me all the time? Or am I a people pleaser from hell? Or, you know, these are some of the things that get written and said about Venus in Libra. But, you know, you can also look at that and you can say the promise of that archetype is this very strong expression of Venus, which is about values and harmony and social harmony and relating and fairness and equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And so it shows that soul's chosen to kind of follow that pathway and develop in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that can be really motivating for somebody when they can see things. It's like anything, it's how you relate to it. And we certainly don't want to make ourselves disempowered in the face of astrology, but we've been taught to make ourselves disempowered in the face of all of our cultural institutions, school, medicine, government, everything.
Yeah.
Right? So we apply ourselves that way. So a lot of the work you do in astrology is getting people to sort of take back their power.
Yeah.
You know?
But, you know, like how you were saying now, when you're saying in the chart, so say, for example, me, Venus, and Libra, one aspect, right? So that you're saying something about me, about how I show up, about how, and again, that's going back to feeling seen as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And then taking that and be like, okay, yeah, so you might have challenges in this aspect, right? Like, you know, maybe the people pleasing or whatever that looks like isn't for me. But then on the flip side, you also have an ability to understand people and understand their needs and understand, and you know, how to kind of work with that. So it can be very activating if done right.
Yeah, you can kind of describe a pathway. So if, say, the way I would use that, if, say, in giving this, is okay to use this example
of course.
you.
Yeah. So
you might say, you know, I really get locked into this pattern of people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, I know what you always say. You say I'm a people pleaser in recovery.
In recovery. Recovering people pleaser.
There you go. And so you might say that to me, and then I might go to the chart, seeing we use your chart, and I might say, yeah, tell me more about that. And I might look at that placement of that Venus, which is a prime placement for such a thing, right? But also, like you just said, also it's the social harmonizer. Also, it's the masterful communicator. Also, it's the uplifter and upholder of all sorts of beautiful things. So what you can do is you can help somebody kind of explore it a little less from a place of I just am. I just am a people pleaser, you know, to, oh, look, it takes it off them. I have this tendency here to this people pleasing. And in the chart, you'll see many tendencies.
Of course.
Hundreds of tendencies, right? That's one of them. It helps them get a little space and distance from that. Then you'll say, how might we work with that? How do you wish you were with people? And then we might use that placement to build out more language around that. That gives someone almost a pathway from a lower expressed or evolved manifestation of that placement to a higher one. And that can be really, that can be really activating.
Which again, using my chart as an example, which I think is good, so people can see how that works. So for example, that, the people pleasing, right? That is something that I've been actively working on, because but that came there, that placement was there for a reason. It's about me learning to claim parts of myself, is being able to set boundaries and kind of transmute that into, like what you were saying, about the, like, let's just use that word, higher vibration, Venus in Libra, and
Yeah.
kind of claim that.
Well, you
and
don't
move through that.
absolutely. You don't develop mastery without process,
Yes.
right? So if your soul chose that, it meant it wanted to pass through what it feels like to be pleasing, and to bury one's own power, and to be overly accommodating, and you somehow needed those experiences in order to learn that that's not something you want to stay in, right? And then it's the process of learning to come out of that. That's the growth. So without that particular thing in the first place, you know, you can say this is like, people don't want to be anxious, but we've all got to find a way to relate to fear. And so when you have a bout with anxiety, you learn ways of facing your fear. If you encourage, you know, if you're going through that therapeutically, right? If you're not just medicating that, if you're going through that in a way where you're learning to hold steadier at higher and higher levels of fear. So what's bad or good? Like, there's no such thing here. You know, is people pleasing bad? Well, no, it was necessary for your journey. That's the dignity we give it.
Exactly.
Right. And we could go on, and the thing with the chart is, you look at, this is why sun sign astrology. So if we think about some of the misconceptions,
Yes,
right?
I was just going to that now.
There you go. So people think, you know, it's being a Virgo, you know, or it's being, you know, the sun sign. So the sun is in a position for about 30 days. And if you're born in that window, your sun is in that thing. And that tells us quite a bit. It tells us about your kind of essence, and what you, when you're at your best, most radiant self, how you might shine into the world, right? What sort of energy you might shine into the world. And so it's beautiful. Like when you see somebody working to the higher evolved frequencies of that sun, you know. So if we take Virgo, which is your sun, for an example, because I think it's good to give examples. You know, Virgo and Scorpio, they're the ones with the rep. Have you noticed this? Like in the modern vernacular, people don't know.
I know
anything.
Virgo. I don't remember. Yeah, that's true. Scorpio. And I get, you know, funny enough, Scorpio woman. And this is something I want to tell you. The whole, I like this in a woman, not in a man. I'm like, but it doesn't work. But anyways, we'll talk more about that. But yeah, it's Scorpio woman that I get. And I'm like, okay, there's so much more to the chart. That's why you're experiencing that way. But yeah.
Exactly.
And Virgo, I get Virgo too a lot.
Yeah. So with people who don't know much about astrology, but they have the pop astrology, you know, I always say that thinking that astrology is the sun sign column you might read online, right? Is like thinking music is advertising jingles. Right? It technically true, but there's a lot
so
more to
much
it,
more,
and it would be really sad for you if that's
and
all
reduced.
That was all you did with music, right? So when you think about the Virgo archetype, a lot of people, Virgo and Scorpio, they've gotten this rep, right? So Virgo is an OCD, really fussy, and got to have everything just so. And Scorpio, that's like super sexual and like will revenge you and intense, you know, and it's like, ooh, like a, you know, watch out, that sort of thing. So they've, for some reason, those two have been reduced to caricatures. But we think about Virgo sun. So your essence is to be able to shine that Virgo frequency into the life for those around you, so that they can literally have that fall upon them, right? And what Virgo is, you know, amongst lots of things, my interpretation of Virgo is not as the Virgin. I don't know where that came from. I've never liked it.
Me neither.
For me, it's the alchemist. Or the temple priest or priestess. It's the holder of what's sacred. So the main energy behind the Virgo archetype is this ability to take in the world and just know in the bones how it could be improved. To see how to take lead and make it to gold. Everywhere, whether that's in a person, a thing, whatever, an experience. And of course, when that overextends or isn't understood properly, when that just happens, it can turn into criticism, and it turns into self-criticism. So you get this classic crisis of confidence with Virgo or heavy Virgo placements. So there's a lot. Now, how we get there in therapy doesn't really matter. We can do a lot of discussing. If I hit a nerve with someone and they go, yeah, I have a crisis of confidence, I talk to myself badly all the time, and I know they've got a lot of Virgo placements. It doesn't matter how we got there. If that feels real, there's a lot of work you can do there, right? So when Virgo is vibrating and shining, it's applying its discernment, and it knows how to treat itself with the care and compassion and kindness that it offers to others. So when you look at the archetypes, they're not 12, there's 6 pairs. So you look at the opposite archetype. So you have to look at Pisces. And Pisces is about the loss of boundaries and the spiritual dimensions of being a human being. And so when Virgo borrows some of that and brings it in and mixes it with its ability to alchemize, then these are the people that when you're around them, you feel like they could make you so much greater just by being in their vibration. And that's what the Virgo vibration really has to offer. And that's at its highest frequency, I think. We have to get careful with terms like higher and lower, because it sounds like, oh, you're low and you're high, but it's just, that's
evolved, right?
Yeah, that's how it sort of, well, what I've noticed is that's how it evolves.
And I think that's all of us as humans. We're here to evolve. So we come with our wounding and stuff, and it's about how do we move through that.
Fully.
That's the plan, right? Hopefully, yeah. But
but reducing someone just to a sun sign and saying that's astrology isn't accurate, because it's incredibly limiting, So you're a Virgo, but then what else is going on in that chart? There's gonna be some really salient features that are just as worth talking about.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I get a lot when people say, "Oh, I like." Let's just give an example. I like Virgo men, but I don't like Virgo women. And then I'm like, oh, but there's so much more to the Virgo than just the sun. And like we're saying, their moon, their placement, so many things that you're experiencing with that person that's more than just their sun.
And then the absolutely unique way that human being performs all of that chart.
Exactly.
So you can't nail it down to I like or I don't like.
Yeah.
You're noticing something. It's more actually about you.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying I don't like Geminis, which I do, Geminis out there, I love you all. But if I'm saying that, I'm actually saying something about me.
And actually, it's funny you say that. I had I don't know, I used to not like Sagittarius. Remember there was a time I was like, Sagittarius trigger me. I don't know. We did my chart, and I have so much in Sagittarius. And when I understood it, it was all about what that Sagittarius energy was bringing up in me that was so shoved down deep inside. So it was not the other person. It was what it was showing up for me. This is why I like when you work with therapy and astrology, because like you said, when you're meeting someone and they're talking about crisis of confidence, you're like, oh, I know there's Virgo in there. When you look at the chart, you cut through all that bullshit and the yapping and you just go and you see, you're like, oh, how can I help you here?
Sometimes the yapping is a very important part of the process.
But then you yap about this and what it's trying to teach you. And what, of course, everybody needs it at a different level. And that's why I'm like, oh my God, don't waste your time. Just do therapy in your astrology. I get it. But another misconception, which is interesting, is everyone tells me, oh, I'm a cusp. And I remember you saying something about cusps.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to clarify that, because I think that's very important, that there's not a lot of people that are cusps or something.
Yeah. So you're only really cusp if you look at the minutes of so you have to have an accurate time. And if you're actually on when it switched over, like in that few minutes, you're not a cusp if you're the last day of. So for instance, if you're born on the last day of Aries, you have 29 degrees. There's 30 degrees in every sign. So you have 29 degrees of Aries. That's actually called the anaretic 29th degree, which is sort of a concentrated Aries position. So you're going to be more Aries than the average Aries. Oh, wow. You often see that. So this idea that just because you're born the day before is a cusp, no, you've got to look at the actual minutes. There are cusp people, who are born right on that minute. But it would still be either 29 or 0 degrees of Taurus. Like you're going to be one or the other depending on the time. This is why accurate birth times are important.
Okay.
If you don't have an accurate birth time, though, there are ways that we can work with that to do what we call rectify the chart, to get a chart that is accurate.
Yeah.
So it involves a whole bunch of processes and things you do. So if you really wanted to get your chart, you don't have, you've just got like, I was born between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. You can work with it. Unfortunately, for people who don't know at all what time they were born on the day, that requires a lot.
Yeah.
But most people can ballpark it somewhat.
And then you kind of work with it. Also another thing I wanted to add out, why astrology has also helped me and why I think it's important is, for example, it's just my moon is Pisces. And when I started understanding my moon, I started also understanding how to meet my needs. My needs are different than how you as a Capricorn moon, how you nourish your needs. And I think getting your understanding, you learn also, of course, there's much more than just the moon. There's much deeper stuff, but you again cut through all the bullshit and the process. I know the process is important, but then you start understanding, even the understanding is a process, of course, but how to meet your needs. Because we come in a society that socialize, okay, I need to do like everybody else. But actually, this unique chart is showing me how I meet my needs is really, really unique to me. Yeah. And meeting your needs and nourishing yourself is really important, especially in the world that we live in. And that has helped me a lot as well. Understanding myself on a deeper level and how to nourish myself. That's why I think it's so important when we're in this treadmill of life. When you have that chart, you can really make friends with it and get to know it and get to know yourself and how to take care of yourself in the way that yourself really needs. And I think it makes, in my mind, the process faster than,
Well, it's that space, right? So instead of being just in this idea of you, that's just one thing. I'm just me and I'm problem, or me and I'm suffering, or me.
Yeah.
It helps you take a look at different parts.
Yeah.
And we'll do that in other sorts of, there are lots of therapeutic techniques that look at parts, right? So when you're giving the example of the moon, so for anyone listening to this who doesn't really understand, and what I'm noticing now is younger people understand that they've got a sun, a moon, and an ascendant. So they kind of know their big three.
Yeah.
Whereas that's different. That's changed, right? So they know that those are different parts that mean different things. So when we look at the moon, it's the body, the ego, the personality, so to speak. It's sort of the most personal of all the planets. It's what we need, how we get our needs met, how we nurture ourselves, how we nurture others, how we kind of go as a being day to day, our daily habits, our daily routines. It's the moon. So that's quite different to looking at the sun, isn't it? That's that me at my highest, most on kind of vibration. As I'm radiating into the world, the moon is more what I'm absorbing, what I need, and then how I can give that out. So when you understand that that's a part, it opens up a really cool area of discussion for what someone needs. It puts a different architecture around it, because we're using this different language system.
Yeah.
And then when you get in touch with that, so as a Pisces moon, you need a daily diet of spirituality. Otherwise, life is very dry for you. If life is just this, that's going to be very depressing. You need a certain amount of internal time. You need a connection and a rich inner imaginative world that you get time and left alone to spend with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these aren't just little quirks of dana. These are actual needs. So you can get people starting to legitimize those parts. Speak them aloud to someone else, have somebody else acknowledge them and validate them, and that can actually change the way that people function.
Yeah.
So it's cool, very helpful.
Yeah.
Very practical and helpful, says my Capricorn moon.
Yeah, yes, very. So thank you so much. I think we could still continue another hour
fast.
or 2 hours on this. Yeah, because I have so many thoughts coming up.
Well, maybe what we can do is we can get questions in from people, and we could take it into an astrological conversation.
Definitely.
If that happens.
Yeah. We could do that.
So we could do that because we've got some pretty big stuff happening in the world astrologically over the next month.
Yeah.
So
maybe doing something around that and bringing that down, into what that might look like. I think that would be really cool, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there is a lot of things happening. But the great thing is you're teaching a new level 1, right? Astrology.
Yeah. On the 31st of January, we kick off.
And then also you do astrology and therapy, and you do like charts?
I do
Yeah.
at the Free Spirit Collective in City Walk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So if anyone wants more and unique and like specialized attention, to come see you, definitely.
Sure thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Okay.
all right. So yeah, I have so many more questions, but
That's okay.
we'll keep it
There'll
for
be
next
a
time.
next time.
There'll be a next time.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for tuning in.
Cool.